The following interview is with Paul Kingsnorth, an Englishman living on a small farm in Western Ireland. He's an acclaimed novelist, essayist, and poet. And he has quite a remarkable story of coming to Christianity and Orthodoxy in particular. That was one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to him, to get his story recorded. He wrote a lovely essay called The Cross and the Machine in First Things, which I will link to below this video. And you can read more in depth his story. All right, so Paul, thank you again so much for joining me for the interview. I've enjoyed reading a number of your works. Most recently, been keeping up with your blog posts on the Abbey of Misrule as much as I can. And there was an article that you wrote, "The Cross and the Machine," which you published in First Things, which I will link to below. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind talking about that, talking about your conversion to Christianity, the process, some of the milestones, intellectual and spiritual. And in particular, you talk about coming to Christianity, but you don't really talk about how you found Orthodox Christianity and how that came about.
Yeah, certainly. Well, that's the essay you're talking about is it's really, as you say, it's a piece that tries to sort of summarize my unexpected conversion to Christianity, which obviously, as you say, is a bit of it's a long journey and it's complex, and we don't really quite understand it ourselves, probably. But I suppose the story is, and this is a story that it seems to be mirrored by a lot of other people who've written to me since they read that piece. Actually, it's not uncommon at all, but certainly in the West now. I mean, I'm English, so I grew up in England, in Britain, in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and Britain's a very post-Christian country. Certainly was when I was growing up, so I didn't have any kind of Christian or religious background at all. My parents aren't religious. It just wasn't a thing when I was young, where I came from. So Christianity to me didn't seem very relevant to anything. The versions of Christianity that I came across, usually sort of in school assemblies or in sermons I went to in churches, sometimes it seemed very either sort of antiquated or a bit patronizing, and I didn't really understand what was going on. It really didn't seem to matter to me. Christianity then, like religion in general, I think certainly, a few decades ago, I mean, I'm nearly 50 now, so when I was young, religion, the story we were learning, and I suppose it still is the story we're sort of learning, although maybe things have shifted a bit, certainly in Western Europe, the story we were learning was that religion was a sort of antiquated thing that we were growing beyond. It was a thing that maybe people still did in other places, or our ancestors used to do, but now that we had science and reason, we didn't need it anymore, and it would sort of die out, which I suppose I sort of believed in. I didn't have any reason to believe anything else, really, so I didn't grow up religious. I didn't have any interest in it, but I did have a great love of nature, which I developed as I grew up as a child, especially on long sort of mountain walks with my father. I had a lot of kind of romantic experiences, or inexplicable experiences, I suppose, in the natural world, which made me into something of a nature lover or even a nature worshipper. So, and when I look back now, that's a religious impulse that I had, actually. It's a spiritual impulse anyway, which was being activated by the natural world, by the kind of beauty of nature. And as I grew up and I saw a lot of the things that I loved in the natural world being destroyed by human industry, I became an environmentalist and an activist. And to me, actually, I think that was a spiritual matter as well, although I wouldn't necessarily have put it like that at the time. I think now when we look at environmentalism, we see a lot of kind of utilitarianism, a lot of people talking about wind farms and fuels and sustainability and these kinds of technological things, and that's fine. But to me, the reason to protect the natural world, or creation, if you like, from being destroyed was a sort of inexplicably spiritual matter. This was obviously a kind of blasphemous destruction of beauty that we were just undergoing for our own purposes of greed and enrichment. And I still feel that. So, you know, that was a spiritual impulse, and it became clearer to me that that was not something that fitted into our kind of very rationalist society that we have now. My environmentalism wasn't irrational as such, but it certainly wasn't driven by kind of utility. And as I got older, that kind of evolved into a more conscious spiritual search, as it tends to as we get older. If you know, we start to question the meaning of things, and for me, when I was 40 years old, I think that I sort of plunged into an investigation into Zen Buddhism, because again, like a lot of Western people, especially in places like Britain, when we start to get religious feelings, we sort of go anywhere but Christianity. You know, for some reason, there's a deep allergy to Christianity. It's like we're inoculated against it. So obviously, if you have a religious calling, you don't go to the church. That's the last thing you do. You go almost anywhere but the church. You know, you become a pagan or a Buddhist or a Hindu or something. Usually go east, or you go to sort of paganism, neopaganism. And I sort of became a Zen Buddhist. I don't know if I would exactly have called myself a committed Buddhist, but I did a lot of practices. I went on a lot of retreats. I learned a lot about the teachings and the tradition, which I found very useful, and I still do. Actually, there's a lot of truth in Zen, actually, especially in the practice. It's a very useful way of getting to know yourself, apart from anything else. But there was, as I kept doing it, I suppose I felt there was something missing, because there's no divinity in it, and I was sort of becoming uncomfortably aware that I was sort of being pulled towards God, actually, which I didn't like to admit to myself. And I suppose I'd always for years had a sense that there was something out there, some, you know, very traditionally sort of modern sense that yes, there's probably something, but I don't know what it is. And so that's that traditional thing. So I wasn't allergic to the idea of God, but the notion of formalizing it was terrifying. And I didn't want to think about that. But it just became increasingly aware, as I said, became increasingly clear to me that Zen was not enough, because there's an emptiness at the heart of Buddhism. And although there's a lot of truth in it, and there's a lot of rationality in it, and there's a lot of very good practice in it, as I say, to me, it was something missing. And that something was the idea of a creator. It was the idea of something divine. It was the idea of an intelligence behind the universe, which I thought I'd seen in the natural world as well. So yeah, I spent many years doing all sorts of things, exploring mythology, going on vision quests in the woods, doing all sorts of things. I ended up then looking, as I say, into neopaganism, which is often the next step. And I ended up becoming Wiccan, a sort of modern witchcraft movement that I was involved in for a couple of years. And again, I learned a lot there. I also learned a lot of stuff that wasn't real, I think. And there was something missing in that. And mainly what was missing in that was that it's a very new, basically invented sort of pseudo-religion with not a lot of theology in it. So although, again, there are practices in it which are useful and interesting, there's something empty about it, because it's very much a sort of modern human confection. And so, yeah, I was sort of enjoying that. And I enjoyed, you know, worshipping in the woods and all the things that you do when you're a witch. That was fun. But again, I suppose there was some sort of itch that there was still something missing. But again, it didn't occur to me to think about Christianity. That was the last thing that I would have wanted to be involved in. And then, yeah, so a number of strange things happened to me, which I detailed in that piece that I wrote in First Things. I started having dreams. I had a particular dream of Jesus, and that disturbed me. And then I was having all sorts of coincidences. Suddenly, all these Christians kept turning up, wanting to talk to me, emailing me, wanting help with their writing, sending me advice. I discovered that friends of mine were Christian that I hadn't known about. My wife, out of nowhere, told me that she thought I was going to become a Christian. She sometimes does things like that. She has these little visions and predictions. And I didn't know what that was about. I didn't want to become a Christian. But really, it all culminated. It built up for a long time. And then I felt eventually that I was being kind of physically dragged into Christianity. I felt I was being hunted by Christ, actually. That's a word that I used a lot. I felt like I was being hunted, which was very disconcerting. And I wanted it to stop, but I also sort of didn't. So I had to spend a lot of time reading and thinking and working out what was going on and talking to people. And then eventually I had a very a profound kind of experience, personal experience, which just felt like I'd been overwhelmed by something. And at that point, I thought, okay, right, well, it looks like I'm going to have to become a Christian then. Having fought it for a long time, I sort of gave into it. And that was that, really, or at least that was the beginning of that, because then I had to think, well, what does it mean to be a Christian, of course? There's a million types of Christian. What is Christianity anyway? You can talk to 20 different people and they'll give you 20 answers. So I had to do a lot of reading of the Bible and a lot of thinking, and again, talking to people and praying and just saying, what do I do now? And that was eventually what I did. And I'm not a joiner. I'm a writer. So, we tend to sort of sit on our own in rooms and do our own thing. But I eventually realized I needed a church. And so I thought, what church do I need? And again, I prayed a lot. And I ended up, having explored a lot of other options, I ended up being pulled towards the Orthodox Church, which again was something that if someone had told me a year before that this was going to happen, I would have fallen off my chair. But I turned out I had a couple of friends who were Orthodox Christians in England. And the more I read about Orthodoxy, and particularly the mystical heart of it, the more I thought, okay, well, here's a form of Christianity that I didn't know existed. Because having grown up in England, I'd seen a sort of Church of England Christianity, or a sort of very new sort of Baptist Protestant variety, which, as I say, didn't speak to me at all. It felt like just sort of antiquated morality lessons, really. But when I started to read the Orthodox saints, and when I found out about Mount Athos, which I'd never even heard of before, and I started reading the lives of the saints, I thought, okay, well, this is actually what Christianity was supposed to be. So we've got this great mystical beating heart here. We've got these saints, we've got this monastic tradition, we've got the Philokalia, we've got all this very ancient wisdom, which can rival anything that the Buddhists have created. It can rival anything that any other religion has created in terms of having 2 millennia of this deep spiritual practice and a path to follow, and particular rituals, and very specific. I mean, it's in many ways interestingly similar to the Buddhist tradition in terms of the monastic tradition and the very specific rules that there are about spiritual warfare, as it would be called in Orthodoxy, and the kind of the internal work you're doing on yourself, and the fasting regime and the whole thing. And I thought, well, this is a form of Christianity I didn't know about. There's something very appealing about this, because what I wanted was a serious tradition. Having dabbled in a lot of things that turned out not to be true to my mind, I thought, and a lot of modern Christianity, if you like, is not very serious, and it isn't a tradition either, because it changes every 5 minutes according to what's changing in society. And Orthodoxy didn't seem to do that. So I thought, well, this looks very interesting, but how can I possibly be an Orthodox Christian? I'm English. I live in Catholic Ireland. All these Orthodox churches, if there are any around anyway, are going to be very kind of ethnic. Not, I'm not Greek, I'm not Russian. So what do I do? So again, I just prayed, really, and it turned out. I then discovered quite soon after that the first Orthodox monastery in Ireland had opened about 40 minutes away from my house, a Romanian Orthodox monastery. And so I thought, well, okay, that's a sign. I'd better go. So I got in contact with them, and they invited me along, and I went to the liturgy, and I'd never experienced that before. And the liturgy was very powerful. The nuns were very, very friendly, very welcoming. So it was the whole congregation. I mean, this stranger just wandered into this largely Romanian church, and everybody was very welcome indeed. And yeah, and I'd said, I'd been praying, and I'd said to God, I said, okay, if you want me to go to a church, find me a church and find me a priest. I said, it's a bit of a challenge. I said, come on then, I'm happy. I'll go wherever you send me. And I went to the monastery, and there was the church, and there was a priest there, and I got talking to him, and we clicked, and that was it, really. And I just started. Yeah, then I had people to help me. Then I had guides, and I had a place to go, and I kept going. And eventually, I thought, okay, this is the thing. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. It felt strangely like I was at home, even though, as I say, it's a Romanian church. I'm not Romanian. It's something I'd never done before. So in many ways, it was actually very alien and new, and yet it felt very, very, very normal, very like the place I should be. So yeah, that's the short version of my life's journey, really. And so I was only baptized in January. That's 6 months ago, in the River Shannon on Theophany. It was extremely cold, so I won't forget that. But it was quite a day. So yeah, it's kind of it's the end of a search for me, but obviously also the beginning of an actual journey, because I'm still very new. I'm still finding my feet. I'm still doing the work, but. yeah, it's been interesting. And like, as I say, I've had, since I wrote about that, I've had a lot of emails from other people who've had similar sorts of experiences, actually, interestingly, of being brought into Christianity, not expecting it, and then ending up in Orthodoxy as well. I'm finding something quite deep and true in that. So yeah, there's something going on out there, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, kind of following on that, thank you. Since you've become Orthodox Christian and been public about it, how has that affected your life? How have your readers reacted? How has your family reacted?
Yeah, it's a good question, really. I mean, personally, my family are very supportive. I mean, my wife is actually from an Indian family, so she's Sikh, and she's actually rediscovering her kind of family religion as she gets older too. So even though our faiths are different, there's actually a lot of similarity between the two, and the religious exploration is kind of going on at the same time. And my family come to the monastery with me. They're very welcome. They enjoy it. You know, it's they're sort of part of that community. So it's actually been very enriching on a personal level. It's been really, it's been quite a powerful experience. Some people in my wider family found it a bit weird to start with, as you would, but I think they've come round.
You had already done taken other unusual steps in your life, so.
Yeah, well, you know, it's an interesting thing that it's very interesting, the situation in the West, or certainly in Europe. I don't know if it's true in America. It's, you know, becoming a Buddhist is almost just like, oh, that's fine. People shrug their shoulders at that. But becoming a Christian is it sort of weirds people out in a different way. And it's very interesting, actually. People who, you know, even becoming a witch, you know, which you think would be a bit freaky, and probably is for a lot of people. Certainly for funnily enough, any of these kind of slightly neo-pagan or Eastern religions are treated, as I say, people will just say, oh, that's nice, that's interesting. But with Christianity, there's always something a bit dangerous about it. And I don't know quite why that is. I presume it's because it's the religion that we've abandoned. And so there's just something about it that makes people react quite negatively to it. It's quite interesting, actually. It's very interesting. People find it threatening in some ways sometimes.
A lot of baggage. It's got a lot of baggage.
I think that's what it is. I think it's got a lot of baggage. And I think obviously it's, you know, it's the religion of the West, whereas obviously Buddhism isn't. So, you know, it's not such a thing. So yeah, it's got a lot of baggage, and it's got a lot of misunderstandings. And so I think C.S. Lewis at one point said it's much harder to try and convince a modern European to be a Christian than it would have been to convince a Roman pagan to be a Christian, because, you know, back then everybody's got a sense of the divine. They just have a different opinion of what it is. Whereas now we've become post-Christian, and as I say, we're very inoculated against it, and we're very scientific and atheistic. So certainly, as I said, as a young man, it wouldn't have occurred to me to be Christian. So in terms of my readers, yes, I mean, I've had a few emails. I had a good one from somebody saying, "I can't believe you've joined this disgusting cult. I'm never reading you again." So that was one of my favorites, but not many, actually. I haven't had many. I mean, there's been a few people who've been a bit bemused, but I think since I've written about it, people can understand what's going on, and they can either like it or not. And I've also gained quite a lot of readers. I have to say, a lot of Orthodox readers, especially, and a lot of Christian readers. And I've had some very nice emails from people who've said, "Look, I've been reading you for a long time, and I'm a Christian, and it's really great to see this happening." So yeah, it's sort of much of a muchness. I think I've probably lost some readers and gained some, but you know, that's kind of what it is. Really, it doesn't really matter in that sense. You just write what you have to write. But yeah, but it's certainly very transformative. I think probably more than anything else that's ever happened to me.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think that's certainly my experience. Nothing compares to it, for sure.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's constantly unfolding as well, obviously. So it's ask me again in a year, it'll probably be different again, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Did years burn out those words? Did a voice whisper absurd? Did your mind comprehend and ask if you'd last till the end?